On a freezing winter evening, Sarah was hurrying home after a long day of work. The streets were crowded, people rushing by without noticing anything around them. But suddenly, she stopped. On a wooden bench near the train station, an old man sat shivering. His coat was torn, his shoes had holes, and his hands trembled from the cold. Everyone passed by, pretending he didn't exist. Sarah's heart sank. She walked closer and asked gently, "Sir, have you eaten today?" The man lifted his tired eyes, his voice shaking, "Not since yesterday." Without a second thought, Sarah helped him to his feet and guided him to a small cafe nearby. She ordered him hot soup, bread, and tea. As the old man ate, tears rolled down his wrinkled face. He began telling her stories, how he once had a family, a stable job, and a happy life. But fate had been cruel. Sickness took his wife, and debts consumed everything else. Sarah listened patiently, holding back her own tears. For years, nobody had cared to ask about him. Before leaving, she pressed some money into his hand, but more importantly, she gave him something far greater, human dignity. The old man whispered with a trembling voice, "You didn't just feed me, young lady. You reminded me that I still matter." That night, Sarah walked home with tears in her eyes but warmth in her heart. She realized kindness didn't always need to be big, it just needed to be real. Late at night, a young mother stood on the roadside holding her little boy tightly in her arms. The child was burning with fever, his breathing heavy. She waved desperately at passing cars, but no one stopped. Finally, an old yellow taxi pulled over. The driver, a kind man with gray hair, quickly noticed her distress. She whispered, "Please, take me to the hospital." As the taxi sped through the empty streets, the mother nervously clutched her purse. She only had a small amount of money, barely enough for groceries. With trembling lips, she admitted, "Sir, I don't have enough fare, but my child, he needs help." The driver looked at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes soft and fatherly. He simply nodded, "Don't worry. Just hold your son, I'll get you there." The taxi screeched to a halt at the emergency entrance. Doctors rushed the child inside. The mother turned to pay, offering all the money she had. But the driver shook his head firmly. "A mother should never have to choose between money and her child's life," he said quietly. The woman broke down, crying and thanking him over and over. She tried to take his hand in gratitude, but he gently pulled away, saying, "One day, when you see someone in need, help them. That will be my payment." That night, as the taxi driver drove back into the city, he smiled to himself. He wasn't rich, but he knew he had saved something far more precious than money. At a small school in a struggling neighborhood, Miss Taylor, a kind-hearted teacher, noticed something troubling. One of her students, Emma, a shy little girl with big brown eyes, never ate lunch. While others unpacked sandwiches and snacks, Emma quietly sat at her desk, pretending not to be hungry. Miss Taylor suspected that Emma's family couldn't afford daily meals. One afternoon, Miss Taylor gently asked her, "Sweetheart, why don't you bring lunch?" Emma lowered her eyes and whispered, "It's okay, miss. I'm not hungry." But the teacher could see the truth in her tired face. That night, she decided to do something. The next morning, Miss Taylor secretly spoke to the class. She explained Emma's situation and asked if each student could bring just a little extra food. The children agreed with excitement, their hearts bigger than their small hands. At lunchtime, Emma sat quietly again. But to her surprise, her desk was suddenly filled with sandwiches, fruits, juice boxes, and cookies, all from her classmates. "These are for you," one boy said shyly. Another added, "We want you to eat with us." Emma's eyes welled up with tears. For the first time, she felt accepted, loved, and cared for. She hugged her teacher and classmates, whispering, "Thank you." From that day on, Emma never sat alone again. The act of kindness didn't just feed her stomach, it nourished her heart. Late one evening, a young couple was driving home after visiting family when suddenly their car broke down on a deserted highway. The engine refused to start, and the road was empty. The husband tried everything but failed. Panic began to rise. The nearest town was miles away. Just then, headlights appeared in the distance. A pickup truck slowed down, and a man in greasy overalls stepped out. He was a local mechanic returning home after a long day. Seeing their worry, he said warmly, "Pop the hood. Let's take a look." For nearly 2 hours, he worked tirelessly in the dark, using only the dim light from his phone. His hands were covered in oil, but he never complained. Finally, with one last twist, the engine roared back to life. The couple sighed in relief, thanking him repeatedly. The husband pulled out his wallet and asked, "How much do we owe you?" The mechanic smiled, wiping his hands on a rag. "Nothing. I know what it feels like to be stranded with no help. Just promise me one thing. When you see someone in trouble, stop and help them." The couple was speechless. His kindness was worth more than any money. As they drove away, they looked back at the humble man waving goodbye, realizing they had just witnessed true generosity. At a busy supermarket, an elderly woman stood in line, her hands trembling as she counted coins. She was short by a few dollars. Embarrassed, she whispered to the cashier, "Please remove the bread and milk." Her face turned red as she tried to hide her struggle. Just then, a young man behind her placed his hand on the counter and said, "Don't worry, I'll cover it." The old woman looked up in shock. "Oh no, I can't let you," she stammered. But the man smiled, "Please, it's nothing." The cashier completed the purchase, and the woman's eyes filled with tears. "You don't know how much this means. My husband is ill, and I needed this food for him." She clutched his hand, whispering a blessing. That night, when the young man returned home, he opened an email. His scholarship application had been approved. He would finally attend college, something he thought impossible. Sitting in his small room, he realized kindness had a way of circling back. Helping others had opened doors for him in ways he never imagined. Daniel, a 7-year-old boy battling cancer, lay in a hospital bed. His parents, exhausted and financially broken, worried that his upcoming birthday would pass like any other painful day. They couldn't afford gifts or even a cake. One nurse, touched by Daniel's courage, decided to share his story online. To her surprise, the post spread quickly. Strangers from across the city came together. On Daniel's birthday morning, the hospital room filled with balloons, toys, cupcakes, and colorful cards. Doctors, nurses, and even people Daniel had never met gathered around, singing, "Happy Birthday." Daniel's eyes widened with joy, his laughter echoing through the room. For a moment, the sickness didn't matter, he was just a child celebrating his special day. His parents stood in the corner, tears streaming down their faces. One mother whispered, "We thought we were alone, but today, the world showed us love." Daniel hugged everyone who came, his small voice saying, "This is the best day of my life." That day, a room full of strangers proved that love has no boundaries and kindness can heal even the deepest wounds.